of the Nation Address debate. Today marks the conclusion of the two-day SONA debate. Over the last 2 days, members of Parliament from all political parties that are represented in Parliament have had an opportunity to make comments and to raise pertinent issues on the State of the Nation Address as delivered by the State President a few days ago.
Good afternoon, and we are coming to you live from the Cape Town City Hall, which will once again serve as the precinct of Parliament joint sitting this afternoon, commencing at 2 p.m. Following the President's State of the Nation address and subsequent debates, the premiers from all 9 provinces will deliver their State of the Province addresses over the next 2 weeks. Look out for those on Parliament from next week.
Yes, indeed, Thembinkosi. The State of the Province address is the localized version of the State of the Nation address, where the premiers reflect on and highlight, of course, their achievements during their tenure and outline their program of action for the year ahead.
And next week, Wednesday, the Minister of Finance, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, will be delivering the budget speech for the year 2023 right here at the Cape Town City Hall. In the meantime, let's look back at a short clip of the speech of the Leader of Opposition, Mr. John Steenhuisen, from the first day of the debate.
On Thursday, a courageous leader who really cared about this nation would have had the head and the heart to admit that his party is wrong, that it is time to cross the Rubicon and embrace the opposite of socialism, which is power to the people. Now, make no mistake about it, South Africa was ready to cross that river. The men and women of this country are tired to their very core of the abuse that this ANC government has put them through. On last Thursday, we looked to you, sir, our president. We asked you to show us the way across the river, to unleash the power of the market to solve our electricity crisis, to get the incapable state out of the way of the incredible resourcefulness and creativity of the South African people, to put us on the road to socio-economic freedom that all of the world's prosperous nations have traveled. Because we don't want to rely on being resilient. We want to rely on being resourceful. We don't want to rely on meager social grants. We want to rely on our own jobs and businesses. We don't want to rely on your cadres. We want to rely on ourselves. And what did our leader do on that riverbank with the fate of our nation at stake? President Cyril Ramaphosa could not cross the Rubicon. Even as our nation pleaded for him to do the right thing and to take us onto this hopeful new path on the other side of the great Rubicon River, he couldn't take his eyes off the rapids. Even as the people of South Africa raised their voice in unison and frustration, all he could do was stare, terrified at the challenge. Instead of leading us across the Rubicon at the SONA of this year, Mr. Ramaphosa told us to turn around, to stay on this side of the riverbank, to double down on the same failed policies and the ANC approach of state control that has landed us in this terrible mess. Too weak, too indecisive, and too cowardly to take on the cadres, the compromised, and the vested interests in the political party that he leads. He turned his back on the Rubicon, he turned his back on us, and he turned his back on the only pathway that can save this country. Instead of getting the state out of the way of private electricity generation, he gave sweeping powers to the very same minister who abused those powers during the COVID crisis last year. Instead of deregulating and unleashing private sector electricity generation, he has centralized even more power in his super presidency. Instead of privatizing failed state-owned enterprises, he's created a massive new state-owned enterprise to provide fresh looting opportunities for the cadres. Instead of removing incompetent ministers of energy and public enterprises who block reform, he added yet another ministry to his already bloated cabinet. Mark this, by once again expanding and rather than shrinking the role of the state, the President has all but guaranteed that load shedding and all the other terrible crises visited on the people of South Africa by his government will only get worse. But a curious thing also happened last Thursday after the SONA. Mr. Ramaphosa clearly believed that the people would simply follow him, as he told us to turn back away from the Rubicon. He took for granted that people would just oblige and follow him back down the road to decay and decline. He has gravely miscalculated. Instead of following him, the people have stayed put, their eyes firmly transfixed on the promise of prosperity and hope on the opposite shore. The response to President Ramaphosa's SONA makes it clear that he has placed the party political interests of his own dying party ahead of the interests of the people of South Africa one too many times. By cowering from the Rubicon, he has lost the support of the country. And last Thursday will forever be remembered as the day that history overtook President Ramaphosa.
Welcome back to our third day of the debate on the State of the Nation address. And we just saw some of the speeches by the leader of the opposition party, Mr. John Steenhuisen, during the debate on Tuesday. Mr. Steenhuisen now joins me in studio. Good afternoon, sir, and welcome to Parliament TV.
Good afternoon. Great to be with one of my favorite channels.
Thank you very much, and it's good to know that we are your favorite channel. Mr. Steenhuisen, in your reaction on Tuesday after the SONA, you indicated that the DA does not support the decision by government to declare the electricity crisis as a national disaster. Other commentators have whipped the DA, saying that you had been calling for the electric crisis to be declared a State of the Nation disaster. What is exactly the DA's position in that regard?
Well, great, and thank you for the opportunity to clarify. And I think that the commentators that are saying that are lazy or disingenuous, because had they gone back and looked very carefully at what the DA was calling for, was for a ring-fence state of disaster around Eskom and the electricity crisis only. We've never called for a national state of disaster. And in fact, if they'd gone beyond the lazy analysis, they would themselves know that we are already in court challenging the national disaster management regulations because we regard them as unconstitutional. What would a ring-fence state of disaster look like? It would look at interventions that are specifically tailored to assist Eskom get out of this particular difficulty that it's in, freeing them up from a lot of the red tape that currently constrains them, freeing them up from the requirement of localization to allow them to import the equipment that they need to fix power stations as quickly as possible, free them up from the visa regulations that hold them back from being able to bring in international experts to deal with the problems at both the power station level but also the management level, being able to free them from the requirements of BBBEE, which price gouges and is part of the reason why they're paying a huge amount of money for substandard coal that's not being delivered. Those are what a ring-fence state of disaster looks like. The analysts as well say, oh, well, there's no provision for that. But how come then, if there's floods or a crisis in eThekwini, the state of disaster is there? It's not a national state of disaster that's declared. So it's disingenuous. We don't believe there needs to be a national state of disaster. There's nothing you can do in a national state of disaster that government couldn't do already. For instance, one of the things government could have done is, in terms of Section 44 of the Constitution, bring an emergency Eskom bill to the floor of Parliament, which would automatically then exempt Eskom from all of these things. My worry is that with a national state of disaster, as we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, it opens up the doorway for mass looting and violation with no parliamentary oversight, which ironically is why we're in court on this particular
But
legislation.
the President has also indicated that they would be bringing in the Auditor General to oversee and ensure that no monies are spent where we don't know.
But let's remember, this is the same president who told us at the beginning of COVID that there'll be no looting of the money and that every cent will be accounted for. That's not the case. Billions of rands were stolen and looted, and stolen from the very people who needed it the most, the poorest of the poor in South Africa. So the president's assurances here are simply hollow, and they're not borne out by experience. And there's a famous saying, you know, fool me once, you know, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And if we fall for the same ruse again, well, then I'm afraid it's on us.
So you mentioned that you had expected that there would be an introduction of maybe an ESCOM bill, and now that there isn't that introduction, and the rules make provisions for members of parliament to submit bills through the private members' bills. Are there any plans that we can expect from the DA in terms of this ESCOM bill?
Yes, we are busy working on that. However, we know that the prospects of private members' bills are not always successful. I think only one in the history of Parliament has ever been passed because the governing party sadly feel that they've got a monopoly on good ideas. I would have expected, though, an emergency bill to be brought to the floor of Parliament. This is how legislatures around the world and governments around the world deal with these things. They bring emergency legislation to the Congress, to the Parliament, to the Senate, to the floor of their particular legislature, and they drive it through and make a compelling case. And I've no doubt that had that been the approach, there would have been wide bipartisan support for such a piece of legislation. What the president's doing is the lazy way out. Just declare a national state of disaster so it looks like you're doing something. We haven't even seen the regulations being published yet. Not 1 kilowatt has been produced as a result of the national state of disaster yet. So it's a way of government looking like it's doing something and appearing busy when in fact they don't really know what they need to do going forward.
So the DA has also raised concerns with the announcement of the appointment of the Minister of Electricity, but they have not provided alternatives. The announcement has been made. The Democratic Alliance is not in support of that announcement. What alternative suggestions?
The alternative that we had was very clear from the beginning, is get the politicians out of the way. The politicians are the problem. You've had a Minister of Energy and a Minister of Public Enterprises who have been the obstacles to energy reform and innovation. Minister Pravin Gordhan is already on record as having been a major obstacle to renewable energy and the restructuring of Eskom that the President himself announced was supposed to take place. Minister Mantashe, a major obstacle towards independent power producers and allowing municipalities to be able to generate and supply and procure their own electricity. So what the President should have done is say, I'm getting my ministers out of the way. We've had, since 2015, this problem. No ministers solved it. Now what we've done is we've added 4 ministers into the mix. You've got a Minister of Public Enterprises, a Minister of Energy, a Minister of Electricity, and sitting above all of them now, this Minister of the National State of Disaster. Too many cooks spoil the broth, and you need to get them out the way. This solutions for this crisis are going to come from the private sector and energy experts. No politician is going to be able to sit and resolve this. Get the politicians out the way, get the ideology out of the way, get the political posturing out the way, and let's get energy experts internationally and locally around a table and then free their hands to deal with the crisis.
And now we are in the final year of this administration, and President has outlined the government priorities for the year, obviously outlining the 4 that are major. So what is the DA planning to do through the committees of Parliament to ensure that during this final year of this administration, it holds the executive to account?
Well, we're looking forward to using the committee processes, but we're also looking forward to using the budget debate next week, because many of these promises will not be borne out in the budget. And you know, there's a famous saying in politics, show me your budget and I'll show you your real priorities. And I think we're going to see what's been funded and what's not funded. There was a lot of talk about infrastructure spend. Let's see if that's matched in the budget next week. That's going to be very interesting. We've got a cost of living crisis in South Africa that's hurting poor South Africans the hardest. If the budget next week does not announce cutting of VAT on bone and chicken and the other products that we've put on the list, baby formula, coffee, other items to relieve the cost of food on poor South Africans, it's not worth the paper it's written on. If we don't lift the import tariffs on basic foodstuffs that we can get a supply here when our own industry is unable to match the demand, it's a waste of time. So the budget next week is going to be the first instrument to hold the government accountable, and thereafter the committees will debate the President's State of the Nation address, and that's where we're going to really be able to unpack and undress what the President's announced and see what's actually the departmental priorities and whether there's an alignment. Because the President last year made a number of big announcements that weren't followed through. We were told crime, GBV was going to come down. It's gone up. We were told unemployment was going to come down. It's gone up. We were told we were going to have a social compact within 100 days. There's still no social compact.
Have you been consulted in relation to that? Have you made consulted to make any contributions? Because the President has spoken about the social compact, and the President has also indicated that as much as the country is confronted with these challenges, but it is not for the government alone to address the challenge, it is for all of us.
I would agree with them. I would agree with them there. But then you've got to have a genuine social compact. A social compact cannot be government going out and telling you what you should be doing. Government must genuinely listen and take on board some of the suggestions and solutions. And unfortunately, my experience with this administration is that it has a tin ear to advice. It pretends to be listening. It takes that advice and then just simply bins it or puts it in file 13. And I think that's a huge problem because no party, mine own included, has a monopoly on good ideas. And in a time of crisis like this, we should be getting people around the table and saying, right, how can we take the best of everybody's ideas and come up with something that's really constructive? And that doesn't happen enough. So no, we haven't been consulted on that. I do put a parliamentary question to the President every month, asking him for progress on the social compact, and I keep being told that it's a very difficult process and it's hard to get buy-in, etc. But then why did you make a promise the year before that within 100 days we would have it? We're now 366 days and we still don't have it.
And I know this question that I'm going to be asking was in part of my script or of the question that I had planned to ask you. But because it is happening right here in Cape Town in particular, we've had reports of school transport being blocked from dropping off school children at schools around Cape Town by Santaco. And the statement that Santaco has issued was that the MEC for Transport, Mr. David Menir, is not meeting with them to iron out the issues that they've previously raised with him in relation to the scholar transport. But the people that are suffering the most are the children who have been unable to attend school. Some have seen pictures on social media of children being hidden in the cars by their parents, in avoiding that the taxi drivers might take off the kids from the taxis. What would you respond
well, look,
to that?
I mean, I'm not familiar with the issue. I mean, obviously, it's a provincial matter, but I would say this, that a province has an obligation to ensure safe transport for scholars. And if unsafe vehicles and unroadworthy vehicles and vehicles with unregistered drivers are being used to transport children, it obviously places them at risk. And I think the province then runs the risk of being held liable if there are accidents through unroadworthy vehicles. I always believe that talk is better than protest, and I would encourage both parties, both the provincial government and the Santaco, to sit around a table and let's not use children as a pawn in a battle, and let's put their interests first always.
And as a parting shot, you referred to the last 5 years as disastrous. Explain to the South African, what did you mean by that?
Well, I meant that every single metric that a country should be being used to measure its progress is going in the wrong direction. Unemployment has gone up since 2018 when Mr. Ramaphosa became president. Gender-based violence has gone up since Mr. Ramaphosa became president. Crime has gone up. 20 people, by 20%, 70 people murdered in the country every single day. The economic growth has declined, not gone up. So every single metric against which you judge a government's performance and which we as citizens should be holding our government accountable is moving in the wrong direction. You cannot say that we've progressed since 2018 when every single one of those figures is going in the wrong direction. And we can turn it around, and that's the great story, is that we can turn it around. We just need a government that's got the will and the ability and the people and the policies to really get stuck in and get the country moving again.
Mr. Steenhuisen, as you had indicated that this is your favorite television station, we'd like to thank you very much for affording us time to talk to you on this busy day. And I wish you all the best of luck for this afternoon as you'll be sitting in the City Hall and listening to the President providing response to some of the issues that you raised during the debates.
Thank you so much. It's always great to be with you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, viewers. That was Mr. John Steenhuisen, the leader of the opposition party Democratic Alliance. There's more to come, so stay tuned to Parliament TV.
President Cyril Ramaphosa will conclude the debate on the State of the Nation address with his reply on 16 February 2023 at 2 p.m. Watch the reply by the President to the State of the Nation address debate live across Parliament's platforms. For more information on the State of the Nation address, visit our website at www.parliament.gov.za or follow us on our social media accounts at Parliament of RSA. Parliament, following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.
On Wednesday, the 22nd of February 2023 at 2 p.m., the Minister of Finance, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, will deliver the Budget Speech 2023 to a sitting of the National Assembly held at the Cape Town City Hall. The budget process is one of the critical instruments that Parliament uses to conduct oversight over the executive. Through Budget Speech, the Minister will update the nation on the state of the economy, public finances, and progress on the government's objectives in terms of service delivery. The budget comprises of the fiscal framework, the appropriation bill, the division of revenue bill, as well as the related budget information. Watch the budget speech live across Parliament's platforms from 2 p.m. on Wednesday, 22 February 2023. For more information, visit Parliament's website on www.parliament.gov.za. Parliament, following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.
We entered this debate with a clear conscience of providing detailed account of the route we have traversed since the last State of the Nation address, and to point out the new trajectory at the center of which is putting the interests of our people above anything else. We do this by rejecting with contempt provocation by those who come here for electioneering posturing as a strategy to conceal their inability to provide concrete solutions to the problems that face our people. The State of the Nation address is about the people, it's about their interest, and it is for their interest. Perhaps it is worth reminding this august House that contrary to the Honorable Steenhuisen, the African National Congress is not a narrow electoral machine like the Democratic Alliance that scavenges on the sufferings of our peoples for survival, but has throughout its existence, the ANC serves as an agent for fundamental change and transformation. Honorable Speaker, we are here today to join our President, His Excellency Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa, to reassure South Africa that despite the difficulties in our midst, with our 29 years of uninterrupted accumulated experience of governance, together with our people, we shall overcome our challenges for better future for all. The President outlined the accountability for the last SONA commitments before this SONA in the one-year review of progress on the 2022 State of the Nation commitments. Anyone bothered to read this account will see it as an honest reflection displaying progress. Several factors impact the implementation of some of these commitments. The escalating electricity crisis, the sluggish growth of the economy despite rebounding from the impact of coronavirus pandemic, and the persistence of the triple challenges of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Madam Speaker, This placed vast expectation of our people on the State of the Nation address debate. It is our view as the ANC that central to this expectation is nothing else but to put the country on a new permanent trajectory of breaking ranks with the scourge of poor delivery of basic services and infrastructure, which is critical for economic recovery, reconstruction, and development. Infrastructure is a primary route to economic growth and development, in that it releases the latent productivity in the factors of production and brings about an increase in the output of individual factors and units of production. It helps to coordinate inputs, outputs, and time to maximize the economic growth rate and enables maximum utilization of plethora of resources, leading to rapid economic development through efficiently employing all means available. Mr. President, contrary to the skeptics, you have surpassed the target of mobilizing international investment, especially for infrastructure development. As an international standard, the rule of law and good governance are fundamental for global investment. Mr. President, on this front, only the blind will fail to see how you have invested more energies and resources in strengthening and repurposing the criminal justice system in line with its constitutional mandate of acting without fear or favor in the fight against crime and corruption. This will go a long way in ensuring safety of all South Africans and ensuring and reassuring international investors that South Africa is a destination of choice for global investment. Infrastructure development and maintenance are the primary base for socio-economic development and job creation in any community, and local economic development is a developmental mandate that all municipalities carry. Through our oversight function, we have identified various factors in the three spheres of government. Firstly, mere allocating more funds is not a panacea to the challenge of basic services. Secondly, lack of capability, poor project planning and management, poor project implementation, and lack of accountability are a deep reality that should be addressed. Budget reprioritization under fiscal consolidation over several medium-term expenditure framework cycles had a negative impact and has yet to assist in enhancing the status of basic services and infrastructure spending. Fourthly, the lack of state capacity and capability, and where the state has contracted the private sector in other instances, resulted in high levels of underspending for allocation of conditional grants in other projects. And lastly, poor leadership and criminal networks in most instances, which is pointed out from various Chapter 9 institutions.
Welcome back. You're still watching Parliament TV as we build up to the President's reply later this afternoon on the State of the Nation Address debate at 2 p.m. The President is also expected to respond to the comments and questions that were raised by all political parties as per what was raised during the debate. I do now have the pleasure of being joined by the Chief Whip of the National Council of Provinces, Ndate Seso Mohai, to talk to us a little bit more about the issues that he raised in his SONA debate speech. Ndate Mohai, thank you so much for making the time, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Dr. Mvulan.
Wonderful. In your speech, you spoke about the importance of infrastructure development as a key mechanism for ensuring that we are building an inclusive economy. Talk to us about the role of the NCOP in particular in ensuring that the commitments that were made by government, particularly in reference to the President's SONA commitments, are actually implemented.
Thanks very much, first, for having me and also for engaging in these discussions. These are very important discussions that occupy the expectations of the people of South Africa. So the NCOP, as a second chamber of our parliament, plays a very important role in the intergovernmental relations, such that the coordination between different spheres of government has got to be ensured that it does take place, not just as a constitutional injunction but in true spirit, national, provincial, and local government do interface, among others, in addressing the basic needs of our people. So as a house that is interested in the basic services, that's provision of basic services, is an important socio-economic mechanism to ensure that the standard of living of the people is uplifted. So we do interest ourselves in the council. We do have a mechanism where we go to provinces, for instance, where in taking parliament to the people, we understand what are the issues that affects the people, the order in which the people rank these issues. For instance, in our country, people do move from the premise that there's high unemployment, there's poverty, and there's inequality. So for government to address these triple challenges, it has got to ensure that infrastructure is at the centerpiece of the development of our country. We believe that the provision of infrastructure is to enhance economic activity, is to ensure that the social needs of the people is met, but also most importantly, is to ensure that communities are integrated. So provision of infrastructure is not just merely providing an asset, but we view it as a productive asset so that even people participate in the producing of such basic services in their communities. So employment creation, we view it as a central part of provision of infrastructure. So really we take keen interest on these issues as National Council of Provinces. But most important is that provinces should be the voice of the people at the national sphere.
Chief Whip, you've had the opportunity to lead as the Chief Whip of the Council for the last few years now. Talk to us about some of the key issues over and above the issue of infrastructure. Of course, you have had the opportunity to ensure, in terms of your responsibility, that key issues, in terms of just framing the program of the NCOP, you lead that process. So talk to us about some of the other key components of development that also, obviously, we must make sure that we create a platform where issues of provincial interest are discussed, but importantly, those discussions must actually reflect the development landscape at province and at local government level. Talk to us about some of those key issues.
But in fact, in the NCOP, we looked into the devastating impact that was caused by COVID-19 pandemic. But we also look into, since 2007, the economic meltdown, to look into how is the economy of the country growing. Is it growing at a pace where it responds to the socio-economic needs of the people? So we came to the conclusion that if you look into the devastating impact of COVID-19, it has created huge backlog on the social aspects, be it on health care, on education, and also in terms of the standard of living of the people. If you look into grants that were introduced specifically for people to be able to make ends meet out of this situation. So in looking into that situation, we felt that it is important as the National Council of Provinces to craft our systemic oversight approach in the manner that follows up that if we do not look into these issues, the conditions will deteriorate, and the conditions deteriorate further. It will cause very serious devastations amongst our communities. So we prioritize issues that come up of climate change conditions, of floods. We're interesting ourselves to look into those issues and what government's interventions are. We focus on issues of economic reconstruction and the revival of the economy. We look specifically on those factors that affects special economic zones in various provinces. We look into the small scale businesses, the support that government gives on the SMMEs, because we believe that only through SMMEs, building productive activity amongst our people, starting to have self-initiatives that are sustainable, that conditions of creating job opportunities will increase. But not only that, we believe that government has got to ensure that the issue of labor-intensive methodology is not just a talk shop. all projects get designed in a manner that will benefit ordinary people, there is an army of unemployed youth in South Africa. But that army of unemployed youth in South Africa needs to be given hope, but among other things, need to be trained in the course of doing. For instance, if you do a labor-intensive road, either access road through pavement or through construction of such a road, people work for about 6 to 12 months or even more, depending on how many kilometers a road can take. But there they are getting training on site, so they are better. They develop skills of supervision on the construction work, and also develop capacity to can be able to do certain measurement on the road. So you're building productive activity amongst our communities. Many young people, therefore, develop necessary skills on their own. They can work or they can generate work. So we believe that really when we focus more on these activities, and even how we have framed our program in the National Council of Provinces, we have prioritized what are topical issues, what are the burning questions, issues that face the people. For instance, we'll be addressing the issue of red tapes. What are these things that are a hindrance in people in terms of accessing government opportunities? Because what government need to do systematically is to ensure that those with aspirations of being in businesses or being entrepreneurs are much more assisted, or facilitation process is much more easier for them. Because it's not just about making people have more, but it's for people to solving problems. By being an entrepreneur, identify areas which they can assist to solve problems, and therefore making a living out of it. Indeed. So those are important areas that we focus attention to.
That's indeed a wide range of very critical issues that the NCOP seems to have covered over the last few years. But talk to us, Chief Whip, about one of the key points that you also raised in your speech, which deals with capacity at local government level. And without state capability, and obviously local government forms a key component, being at the coalface of service delivery. Talk to us about specifically how the NCOP will ensure that the municipal infrastructure grant is actually spent. And yesterday we had a very interesting conversation with the Deputy Minister of Cooperative Governance, and she was talking about the commitments or the plans that are underway. And of course, you rightfully point out the critical role that infrastructure plays in creating conducive conditions for the economy to thrive. So talk to us about, particularly within the context of the next 14 months, as we move towards, gearing towards the national elections, what will the NCOP do to ensure that capacity is built, and of course that, that infrastructure grant that of course will be released to make sure that, those key things that people talk about, infrastructure, roads and things that are quite critical for improving the quality of life of the poor are actually expedited in terms of implementation?
What concerns us the most is when you find that basic infrastructure that exists in communities is left unmaintained. Lack of maintenance of existing infrastructure, first and foremost, is an issue that we have to give attention to. Because even in municipal infrastructure grant, it's a grant that is dedicated to ensure that municipalities provide much needed infrastructure. For instance, water waste management plans. Most of the time you find that even projects that are well planned but are not executed within the cycle within which projects are supposed to be completed, you find that there is high turnover of municipal officials, particularly even at crucial areas, CFOs, engineering, and financial skills. You find that there's forever a movement from either low-scale municipality into high-revenue-based municipalities. So we made a specific call that national and provincial government has got to develop much necessary capacity to deploy in such municipalities, that infrastructure is executed within plan, and thus it reduces the cost of doing that infrastructure. Multi-year projects by very nature are expensive because the cost rises. So we would want government to reach a stage where if a project has to be completed within 12 months or 18 months, it should be completed, within that period. But also expose areas where there are bottlenecks and also because the delay in execution of projects also increases corrupt practices within municipalities. Because when they have corrupt practices, it means a lot of resources falls within the cracks. They are not producing the intended assets in the communities. So we call for more transparency and even the restructuring in terms of the procurement system. Because in our own work in the National Council of Provinces, we have come to discover that most of the projects that are not implemented are projects that are budgeted for. It's not because that there's lack of resources in this project, but it's because of delay in terms of procurement system. Because the more the delay, the more undercover activities takes place, where these things has got to be allocated to company A and B without due regard of due process. So really we feel that there is no longer time to entertain those things. We have to expose some of the inconsistencies around procurement issues, but we are hopeful that the National Treasury review of the procurement policy will be able to help and to ensure that there are lesser involvement of officials that are not supposed to be involved in the process of tendering, so much that they work also, because there are certain policy objectives that must be achieved. We are worried about basic infrastructure, because it is this basic infrastructure. If there's lack of an access road, if there's potholes, if the clinic under rainy conditions is not conducive for people to be there, if a hall is not conducive to house people during pension payouts for other communities, all of those issues, if they are not in existence, they alienate the community from accessing the much needed services that they need on their daily lives. But also they make the cost of living very expensive, because ambulances are unable to access households under conditions that are difficult. Police are unable to make regular checks and patrols in our communities. Therefore, it becomes the survival of the fittest. And we can't allow that kind of a situation in our communities. We have to appreciate that government exists in order to serve the needs of the people. And we've got to ensure that our oversight is much more calculated, it is much more proactive, and it helps even to address that municipalities. There's no choice. Auditor General identifies that lack of political leadership exists at various spheres, where there is disclaimers, where it is fruitless expenditures. So we have got to attend to those issues with the little resources that we have, but ensure that they make meaningful impact.
Indeed. Just as we conclude, Chief Whip, the NCOP obviously is an apex chamber with regards to ensuring, basic services are provided to the poor. And as you eloquently have expressed now, talk to us about what ordinary South Africans can expect the NCOP, how the NCOP can be expected to reposition itself to make sure that it expedites, the implementation of these key commitments that have been made, as you conclude very briefly.
The National Council of Provinces is going to look without fail on the budget that is going to be presented, how that budget is reprioritized in terms of provision of basic infrastructure. We are going to look into the budget for education, for health, budget for addressing to bad road networks that exist in our communities. We are going to design an oversight and monitoring program in the National Council of Provinces. We are going to call relevant national departments where the concurrent powers in the National Council of Provinces. There is going to be a very much high level of oversight that is going to be played. There's going to be robust engagement with the executive. Without fail, we're going to hold executive accountable. That some of the things that has happened, we must demonstrate that the government that is led by the ANC has been in power now over 29 years. So there is no longer a learning. There should be execution. And execution is more important than theory.
Absolutely.
You can no longer take it any explanation other than doing things right.
Absolutely. That was the Chief Whip of the National Council of Provinces, and that is Cyril Ramaphosa, sharing his insights in terms of what he has raised in the debate, and of course the approach of the NCOP in terms of ensuring that in this year 2023 and going into the elections, that the NCOP is going to play a very aggressive, so to speak, and robust role in ensuring that the executive actually commits. And with that said, Ntate Mohai, thank you so much for making the time to be with us.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Dr. Mpula.
We are now quickly going to cross over to a clip on the ACDP and the AIC. Do stay tuned.
As I have decided to dedicate my speech today to my precious wife, who is now with the Lord, I'm going to raise two issues she was unhappy about at the time of her homegoing. Besides high levels of crime in the country, particularly the rape of women and children that she was very upset about, she was concerned about the regular blackouts that are costing jobs, livelihoods, and loss of lives of patients who rely on constant electric-powered machines that supply them with oxygen. Mr. President, it is very unfortunate to know that the unreliable ESCOM of today used to be the #1 power utility in the world. While addressing leaders of political parties on the 15th of January 2023, the President told us that the challenges of ESCOM include criminality, corruption, lack of maintenance, lack of accountability, and lawlessness. The President further said that the journey of ESCOM started gloriously right at the beginning when it attracted some of the best skilled engineers. But because it was run as an apartheid entity, he said, when government embraced transformation, that led to a number of challenges. The President further said that they have sourced the expertise of an international company to address the culture of lawlessness at ESCOM. The ACDP does not agree with this decision, just as we do not agree with the addition of yet another minister to an already bloated cabinet to deal with ESCOM challenges. We are convinced that ESCOM does not need another politician with the title of Minister of Electricity, but it needs a professional, skilled engineer who knows what the team that made ESCOM win the title of the best power utility company in the world did, regardless of their skin color. Speaker, our people are tired of these unending rolling blackouts that make their lives difficult. They want electricity now. They want government to stop putting their skin color before skill, competence, and efficiency. Demands for electricity in South Africa are increasing daily. Whilst there is increasing pressure to adopt non-fossil fuel electricity generating technologies, the abundant reserves and low-cost coal make it the preferred energy source to meet increasing electricity demand for the foreseeable future. The world's relative dependence on coal does not mean that the role of coal burning in global climate change will continue unchecked. A variety of options referred to as clean coal technologies are being researched and implemented throughout the world, with South Africa and ESCOM making significant contributions to this field. Clean coal technologies use coal for power generation in more environmentally acceptable and economically viable ways. They include processes that can be upheld before, during, and after utilization. And as I conclude with the second issue that concerned my wife and also a number of ACDP people, is that there is now a talk of a new world order that the President we know supported when he addressed the rally on the 27th of April 2018 in the Free State. That is disappointing to us because we know what the implications thereof are going to be. I want to announce today that my family and I will, together with faithful members of the ACDP, never be part of this one world religion that will come with a new world order, that will be imposed on citizens of the world by agents of the Antichrist. We believe in Jesus Christ alone and will never apologize for it. Thank you.
President Ramaphosa delivered his seventh State of the Nation address last week, Thursday. Let's do the count properly. In his first address in 2018, The president extensively recited Hugh Masekela's composition, Tumamina. In retrospect, we know that the meaning of the song has been distorted throughout the president's term. There is no hand shown to lend. There is, in fact, a regression of the past years and a complete lack of vision. In our view, it was ironic that the president left out Letambulu's iconic song that says, "Not yet Uhuru," back in 2018. The song depicts the real state of our nation. Mbulu reminds us in the song that, I quote, "Umhlaba wakithi usemindawonye, akukho mehluko kulelizwe." She goes on to say, "Ilifa lezithutha lidliwa ngabahlakaniphileyo," close quote. And as expected, she urges South Africans to break the shackles. This sentiment is unusually shared across the spectrum and among retired judges, academics, professionals, capital, trade unions, the working class, and the poor. They all insist that the crippling electricity supply, state corruption, and the dire living condition of our people must rally everyone into action to end the reign of this poor administration. This cohort believes that the current crisis constitutes a failed revolution. Honorable members, the president is fond of hope. The following timeline reflects this obsession. From 2019, the word hope appears not less than 15 times in his multiple SONA addresses to the nation. The president is perpetually hopeful. It is not hope, regrettably, that will address the widening Gini coefficient and income per capita divide in the country. Hope will not get us secure electricity. Hope will not reverse the impacts of load shedding on businesses and farmers who continue to be the hardest hit by this calamity. We need decisive leadership, not hope. We know under President Mbeki that the interests of the country took precedence over those of ANC membership. President Mbeki would not have created an electricity department for fear of firing a dismal energy minister. Where is the Mbeki courage, the Mbeki foresight? Honorable members, it is this courage and foresight which saw a budget surplus of 0.6% of GDP back in 2007. Honorable Chair, the President must lead with a firm hand. The President has to realize that given that the South African coal is competitive on the world market, Eskom will be affected by increases in coal exports. To deal with this, the President must urgently proclaim coal as a strategic resource in order to disconnect the domestic market price from the export price. This will be a temporal measure pending the maintenance of Eskom's power plants. We are also of the view that demanding ministers to meet their KPIs instead of burdening the fiscus with continuous duplicate written appointments conjures up bold leadership. In closing, we wish to offer the following solutions to the President. To end unemployment among unemployed graduates, a graduate supply development fund must be created to provide seed funding for graduates who want to be entrepreneurs. So the President must be decisive, and we also want to advise him to bolster the capacity of the state to industrialize an import substitution strategy must be established immediately. To end load shedding, electricity generation must be left
Time is
to the
up.
private players, at least in the interim, while ESCOM continues to maintain its old plans. I thank you.
Welcome back. We are inching closer to 2 p.m. and the start of the President's reply to the debate on the State of the Nation address. If you have been tuned to Parliament TV for the last 2 days, you will have heard the political parties debating the State of the Nation address. There are many points which have been raised over the last 2 days' debate and a lot for the President to consider as his reply today. So, we've had it here. Apart from what has been happening in the City Hall, we've had those points repeated here on Parliament TV, and we're waiting to hear how the President is going to reply to the issues that have been raised.
Indeed, Thembi, I think everybody's waiting with bated breath right now to hear how the President has processed all the recommendations that have been made, or the counter proposals, or the ideas, and even the criticisms. Because, you know, sometimes they say even your criticisms that you receive, there's also some positives in there that you can extrapolate and then integrate into, you know, a well-established or a good plan. So with regards to what we are expecting, and of course, I'm also speaking as an ordinary South African, South Africans are waiting with bated breath to hear how the President is going to take all of these issues that have come out of this, through this robust debate over the last 2 days, and give us the final approach in this last year of the 6th dispensation.
And we're getting closer to the time, as you can see inside the Cape Town City Hall there on your screen. Minister Godemandashe talking to Mr. Willie Madish of the Congress of the People. Members are settling in, and I'm sure everyone is just waiting to hear what the President will have to say, and the issues of the opposition to the announcement of the appointment of the Minister of Electricity, the accusations that nothing has been done with the action plan on the energy crisis since he announced it last year in July 2022. So we're sitting and waiting. The House is filling up. Members are walking in. You can see the members of Good Party, Brett Heron, on your screen. You can see the members of the Democratic Alliance, members of the IFP having a chat there with Mr. Groenewald of the Freedom Front Plus.
I think it's also critical, Thembi, to just bring into focus again what the 4 priorities that have been outlined or committed to by the President in his in his 2023 State of the Nation address, and that's the issue of load shedding, which was quite a topical issue that many, in fact, all the political parties, that was the main thing that they responded to in their reactions after the speech. Number 2 is reducing unemployment, because obviously we know that there's high levels of unemployment currently, given especially the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And 3, addressing rising levels of poverty and the rising cost of living. And number 4, addressing issues of crime and corruption. So within context, those are the 4 issues that obviously the President will be speaking to, but we must also be mindful that the President speaks to or commits to these 4 issues or these priorities within the broader context of the 2019 or 2019-2024 medium-term strategic framework commitments, and those are those 7 priorities. So we have to keep that in mind, that the President, obviously, I mean, this is it's a critical year, it's a significant year to reflect not only on what has been achieved by government, but also to accelerate implementation on the priorities that are remaining as committed to by the President in his 2023 State of the Nation address.
Indeed, Sibu, as you have rightfully indicated, that it's not only limited to those 4. There is a number of priorities, but the President has indicated that the 4 will form priority. We know that load shedding is one of the main, the critical issues that we are currently confronted with, and we all want to see the end of load shedding. So I know that the President will be providing response to all those issues that were raised during the debate in relation to that.
Speaker of the National Assembly is about to take her seat, take the presiding seat, to commence the proceedings of the day. his reply to the two-day State of the Nation Address debate. With that said, we are crossing over to the City Hall now for the proceedings to start.
There will now be an opportunity for silent prayer or meditation. Please be seated. You didn't get medication today, it's meditation. I realize the Honorable Singh has joined the chorus of medication, of medication. Order. Anyone speaking? Order. The Secretary will read the order of the day.
Reply by the President to debate on the state of the nation.
The Honorable the President.
Thank you. Thank you. Speaker of the National Assembly, Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, Deputy President of the Republic, David Dabete Mabuza, Ministers and Deputy Ministers, the leaders of political parties here present, as well as the Deputy President of the governing party, Paul Mashatile, honorable members. In the State of the Nation address last week, I said that a nation is defined by how its people meet the gravest difficulties, whether they work together and confront their challenges as one, united by a common purpose, or whether they surrender to the problems before them. The same can be said of their elected representatives. As we, the elected representatives of the people of our country, gathered here in this House, we have to ask ourselves whether we are able to work together to confront the challenges of our nation, united by a common purpose, or will we be consumed by our differences and in doing so surrender to the problems that beset our country? The debate on the State of the Nation address over the last 2 days has done much to emphasize our differences and to reveal the extent of political contestation in our society. In a way that is to be expected and even welcomed, in a vibrant and robust democracy like ours, we must expect such contestation. The debate has raised important issues and some constructive suggestions have also been put forward. But there are those in this House who, instead of being what I would call merchants of hope, have cast themselves as merchants of despair. They have determined that their political fortunes are best served by depicting our country, South Africa, as being in chaos, instead of being parties that acknowledge the challenges and that are determined to work together with all of us to find solutions. Rather than present a balanced assessment of the state of the nation, they have instead resorted to dishonest and self-serving rhetoric. Rather than acknowledge the grave damage caused to our country by what has ensued in the past, such as state capture, by the effects of a devastating global pandemic, and by the worst public violence in the history of our democracy, some of these honorable members have failed to come up with practical suggestions or solutions that can resolve the many problems that our country faces today. Some chose to belittle and even to deride what has been achieved over the last 5 years in the midst of extremely difficult conditions, because it does not serve their political interests to recognize the progress that has been made and progress that is plainly clear to everyone who cares to look. The contributions that they have made may serve their electoral aspirations, but they do not serve the interests of the people of South Africa. The task we have as elected representatives, as I said, is to emerge from this debate with a common determination to meet the challenges of the present, but also to renew the promise contained in our Constitution of a better life for all. Where people began to doubt the promise of our Constitution, it is our job to restore their faith in our Constitution, not through words, but through action. To do so, we must reflect deeply and honestly on what has gone wrong, on where we have strayed from the path we set out in the first place. As the Honorable Prince Buthelezi rightly said in his remarks, which were delivered by the Honorable Singh, what South Africans want is honesty, fairness, justice, and to know that their government is capable and willing to do its job. At the same time, we must reflect on the progress that we have made, and real progress. And we must concentrate on the actions that we need to take now to overcome the challenges that face us. Nobody can deny the distance we have come over the past 5 years, nor can anyone deny that our country has been struck by successive crises that have severely impeded our efforts to improve the lives of our people as we would have wanted to. We inherited a state hollowed out by corruption and malfeasance and an economy in steep decline. Since then, we have rebuilt the capability and restored the independence of institutions that are essential in our democracy, institutions that had been weakened. We have reinvigorated entities like the South African Revenue Service, the National Prosecuting Authority, the Special Investigating Unit, to fulfill their mandates effectively without fear or favor. That we have done. The tireless work of the State Capture Commission and the Investigating Directorate is now bearing fruit in the prosecution of those alleged to have been involved and responsible for state capture. We faced up to the worst global pandemic in a century and marshaled an unprecedented response to save lives and to protect livelihoods. We implemented a new social grant which has reached more than 11 million people. We supported over 5 million workers who would otherwise have lost their jobs and provided tax relief and direct support to thousands of businesses and helped them to survive. Indeed, Honorable Masango, South Africans need hand-ups and not hand-outs. That is why our unprecedented expansion of public employment programs has proven to be a great success, and they've also proven to be an effective tool for mitigating unemployment when not enough jobs are being created by the economy. The presidential employment stimulus has created work and livelihood opportunities for 1 million people to date, most of whom are young people. We have implemented far-reaching economic reforms to restore confidence in our economy, and that is why investors are looking at our country with great interest and many of them investing. We've opened the way for private investment in electricity generation for the first time and released spectrum to harness the potential of the digital era. For a province like the Northern Cape to have attracted 100 billion rand in investment in just a matter of 3 years must mean that something is cooking and happening. We have successfully mobilized new investments in factories, production lines, call centers, and the Western Cape is teeming with a lot of call centers that are being set up here. It's largely because of the work that is being done by the national government, whether you like it or not. Farms and mines are being invested in across the country. These have created jobs and opportunities, including for small business. Special economic zones in Gauteng have been set up because international companies have seen that we really mean business, and we are indeed embarking and implementing the reforms that we promised we would make. This represents real progress to rebuild our country and to recover from what we lost. Despite this progress, however, we face steep challenges. South Africans are worn down by power outages, water supply interruptions, rising crime, and instability in local government. That, we admit, several speakers in the debate raised the need for effective and urgent implementation of the tasks outlined in the State of the Nation address to address these challenges decisively over the next year. Now, the ANC is not the only party that is in government, in various entities, government structures. And one of the speakers here stood up and said, just be careful that as you throw stones, do remember that you also live in a glass house, because the same could be happening to your side as well. And we do not need to go through a litany of the various failures that we are experiencing at local government level. And this affects all parties that are also in government in various centers. The important thing, though, is for us to realize that we have a common problem and we've got to find common solutions rather than to stand here and throw stones. Foremost amongst the actions that are needed for the resolution of our challenges clearly is the electricity crisis. As we said during our address last week, we do not need another plan. We need to accelerate the implementation of the plan that we have already put to the nation in July last year. We have already taken a number of important steps to reduce the severity and frequency of load shedding. The measures which the Minister of Finance will announce in a week's time in his budget will boost the rollout of rooftop solar by business and households. To end load shedding, however, we must shift gear. A crisis of this nature demands a coordinated response and it demands urgent action. That is the reason why I'm appointing a minister in the presidency and the reason why a national state of disaster has been declared. As I said last week, cheers. Now, focused attention requires us to do a whole number of things. And as I said last week, this new minister will assume responsibility for overseeing the various aspects of the electricity crisis response. The minister will be responsible for driving the various actions being coordinated by the National Energy Crisis Committee to end load shedding as a matter of urgency. The reality is that the resolution of the energy crisis requires effective coordination across several departments and public entities. It requires the undivided attention of a political principal who does not need to split their time, their energies amongst different important responsibilities. This appointment will ensure that there is a minister who is ultimately responsible for resolving load shedding and who is able to work with all fellow cabinet ministers, departments, and entities also. Some have suggested that the appointment of the minister will cause confusion and fragmentation, and that it might also result in turf wars amongst the ministers who deal with energy and ESCOM. That is not the case. This minister will be focused day in and day out only on addressing the load shedding crisis, working together with the management as well as the board of ESCOM. The minister will be leading the National Energy Crisis Committee and interacting with all other departments in a spirit of cooperation or cooperative governance. The Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy deals with matters of energy policy as well as mineral resources. Beyond the energy crisis that we face, the restructuring of government will be effected to enable entities that fall under various departments to be properly located in those departments. And the Minister of Public Enterprises is executing the recommendations of the Presidential Review Commission, as well as the State-Owned Enterprise Council that I appointed, in relation to the ownership and governance of state-owned enterprises. That function should be completed in time as we continue with the restructuring of government. The Minister of Public Enterprises will therefore continue to work on the restructuring of Eskom as well as other state-owned enterprises until then. With the focus that the Minister of Electricity will have on load shedding and the work that is being done by Eskom and the board, I do believe that we stand a much better chance to address this overriding challenge and crisis that our country faces. And through this effort, we should be able to bring load shedding to an end. As Minister Mantashe said, urgency of execution and delivery is paramount. We don't have the luxury of time. Now, several speakers in this debate have argued that the national state of disaster is unnecessary, or that it will allow for abuse of the system, and some have even suggested that it will allow for the abuse of financial resources. This includes some leaders in this very House in the opposition, such as the Premier of the Western Cape, who as recently as last month was writing me a letter and holding media briefings calling for a state of disaster to be declared. Now, the Honorable Brink yesterday called the Disaster Management Act a dangerous weapon in the hands of incompetent ministers. This is the same Disaster Management Act that made it possible for us to take decisive, effective, and agile responses to deal with COVID-19. It was this act that empowered us during that pandemic to save many lives and prevent even greater hardships. It is this Disaster Management Act that we have on our statute books that has on numerous occasions enabled us to provide urgent relief and support to people affected by floods and other natural disasters. The state of disaster that was declared last week will be used to mitigate the social and economic effects of load shedding and accelerate the measures that are necessary to close the shortfall in electricity and nothing else. As I said in the State of the Nation address, we will ensure that environmental protections and technical standards are maintained and that procurement is undertaken, yes, with transparency and proper oversight. We will use the state of disaster to rid of unnecessary bureaucratic obstacles that stand in the way of urgently bringing new generation capacity onto the grid. And we will use it to ensure continuity in the provision of critical services and supply chains and to address the impact of load shedding on businesses and on households. As we build on an electricity system that will meet our energy requirements into the future, we need to dispel some of the myths that have been circulating and that have been repeated even here about the path that we are taking. We need to dispel this idea that we are abandoning coal as a fuel source. We should all remember that coal-fired power stations provide 80% of our energy source right now and will therefore continue to provide the bulk of our baseload supply into the future. Even as people in international forums have asked me, I've said we've just built 2 mega power stations, Kusile and Medupi, that generate some 8,000 megawatts at great cost. And there's just no way that we are going to shut those 2 power stations down. There's just no way that we are going to do that. And I've told them that, insisting that we are, however, committed to a future energy mix that consists of a diversity of energy sources, including coal, renewables, nuclear, gas, hydro, battery storage, biomass, and other forms of energy. We must dispel the idea that unbundling of ESCOM into 3 separate entities is out of step with the international trends. The reality is that over 100 countries, including China, Germany, and Russia, have established independent transmission and system operation companies. We need to dispel the claim that creating a more competitive, efficient, and sustainable electricity generation market threatens the ability of the state to provide affordable electricity to its citizens. In fact, it enhances it. On the contrary, the reforms we are undertaking will improve the ability of the state to provide power to the people now and into the future. And the power we want to be able to provide to our people is affordable power. Our priorities in 2023 are to decisively resolve the electricity crisis, to reduce unemployment, and to root out corruption and crime. Yet, as we confront the most immediate and pressing challenges facing our country, we must also plant the seeds for future growth. We must ask ourselves not only where are we as a country, but what kind of a country we want to be. We need to undertake other essential work now so that we can build beyond the crisis and, yes, lay the foundation for a better future for all South Africans. As a country with a young population, we have enormous potential for growth and development. The most effective way to harness that potential is through ensuring equal access to quality education. In the State of the Nation address, we outlined some of the work underway to improve access to quality early childhood development. This is being supported by progress in basic education, where schools in poorer areas are showing improved performance, and thanks to greater government support. We are developing vocational education and training opportunities and implementing new ways to fund workplace training programs so that we develop the skills that the economy needs. And through the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention, we are creating opportunities for young people to more easily access opportunities for employment, for training, for entrepreneurship, and work experience. By the same measure, access to quality health care, and indeed better health itself, are necessary to improve our people's lives and build a successful society and a more productive economy. We are committed to the provision of quality health care for all, regardless of their ability to pay. We will therefore progressively implement the National Health Insurance, the NHI, as soon as necessary. As soon as the necessary legislation is approved by this Parliament. In the meantime, we are preparing for its implementation through the National Quality Improvement Plan and putting in place the necessary staffing as well as the funding that is required. We are improving the quality of care in our clinics through the Ideal Clinic program, using the capabilities of the electronic vaccination record system that we developed for COVID-19. Now, the Department of Health will introduce an electronic health record solution to improve management of health records throughout the country. As our country and the world recovers from COVID-19, we are strengthening the fight against the HIV pandemic that we have been engaged in for more than 3 decades. While we have made remarkable progress in fighting HIV, as well as tuberculosis, new infections are still occurring at unacceptable rates, and we continue to record deaths that could have been prevented. We are also working to combat non-communicable diseases like diabetes, hypertension, and cancer. We are paying greater attention to mental health. According to the World Health Organization, around 1 in 5 South Africans suffer from mental health disorders. Our starting point must be to raise awareness as well as to combat stigma around mental health so that people are able to seek and to receive mental health services. Beyond that, we need to dedicate more resources and qualified professionals to the provision of such services. We are working to end discrimination against persons with disabilities and to remove the impediments of their full participation in the economy, in society, and in all areas of life. Last year, we held a very successful summit on economic empowerment for persons with disabilities to improve access to resources such as land, finance capital, decent work, capital infrastructure, and labor. This year, we plan to continue this work by dealing with barriers to transport for persons with disabilities and ensuring that government institutions make reasonable accommodation for persons with disabilities in the workplace. The Honorable Holomisa has raised the issue of pensions of civil servants and military veterans from the former TBVC states. These are indeed issues that need to be considered. The Deputy President heads a task team on benefits for military veterans, which has a work stream on pensions. I have asked this task team to provide a report on this matter. And I've also asked the Minister of Finance to set up a team to look into the issue of pensions for civil servants from the TBVC states. So that work is going to get underway. And I'd like to thank General Holomisa for having raised this matter. He raised it as a real issue that needs to be addressed, and that I saw as a very constructive issue that he raised during the debate. Thank you, General, for raising the issue in the way that you did. Building beyond the crisis means addressing the fundamental threat of climate change and strengthening our country's resilience to future disasters. The ambitious carbon emission targets that we have set are essential to the future well-being and prosperity of the people of South Africa. Unless we act now, alongside other countries of the world, our country will experience ever more frequent and ever more severe weather conditions, more lives will be lost, more people will be displaced, and living conditions will worsen. This picture was even better put before us by the Premier of Mpumalanga, who spoke so eloquently about how Mpumalanga is addressing the issue of climate change and what the dangers of not addressing climate change are. And they don't only touch on the livelihoods of people, but they also touch on the health of people as well. Through the work of the Presidential Climate Commission, the Presidential Climate Finance Task Team, led by Mr. Daniel Minele, government departments and stakeholders, we have developed a clear, just, and inclusive path towards a low-carbon economy and society. Now, as we work to reduce emissions, we must undertake adaptation measures to counter the effects of climate change and design our cities, our towns, our rural areas to be more resilient in the face of adverse weather events. And this is where we need real good planners for our cities outlay, even for our rural areas. We need town planners, we need engineers that are going to be aware of what climate change ravages are doing to the topography of our country. We will be reviewing our disaster management architecture to make sure that it is adequately equipped to respond to floods and other natural disasters going forward. Building beyond the crisis also means rebuilding our infrastructure. Several speakers in the debate spoke about the poor state of much of our infrastructure. And in many cases, they are right. Investment in the construction and maintenance of our infrastructure has been declining over many years. Since taking office, we have taken important steps to reverse that trend. Through Infrastructure South Africa, we have focused on building the capacity within the state to design, to prepare, and to implement infrastructure projects. You will recall that in the State of the Nation address, I did cite this as a major challenge. Now, through the Infrastructure Fund, we have sought new approaches to also funding infrastructure, drawing on a diversity of sources. We are also undertaking structural reforms in energy, in water, in our ports and railways that will enable greater investment in these vital industries. We have significantly increased the budget allocated to infrastructure across the government. And as I indicated in the State of the Nation address, significant road, water, housing, and other projects are underway, and the Minister of Finance will, as he outlines his budget, be able to focus on this as well. To succeed in all these efforts, we need to ensure that the state has the necessary resources, that it has the necessary capacity and all the skills that it can master to be able to execute all its plans. We are taking important steps to professionalize the public service across all spheres to ensure that the right people are appointed and are placed in the right positions, that they are held accountable and they are empowered to provide the best possible service to the people of our country. Further to this, I'm directing that all infrastructure and service departments conduct skills audits within a short space of time. These audits must not just tell us what training officials think they require, but must help us understand where critical skills exist in those departments to effectively deliver infrastructure and services. The National School of Government will work with other organs of state like the Human Sciences Research Council, the HSRC, to conduct these audits. We said in the State of the Nation address last week that South Africa's fortunes are linked to those of our continent. We depend on a peaceful, stable, and prosperous Africa to advance our own development as a country. In April last year, South Africa assumed its two-year term as a member of the African Union Peace and Security Council. We will be chairing a meeting of the Council in Addis Ababa tomorrow. Through our participation in the Peace and Security Council, South Africa is working with other countries to bring peace to areas of conflict on our continent, such as the Eastern DRC, whose president I had a lengthy discussion with last week, with Libya, the Sahel region, and northern Mozambique as well. In October last year, South Africa hosted and played a role in the facilitation of the successful peace talks between the government of Ethiopia and the Tigray People's Liberation Front, which were facilitated by the African Union. Our former Deputy President, Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, participated in these talks and flew the South African flag on our behalf. We will continue to provide whatever assistance we can to the resolution of conflict and peace keeping on our continent. Our recent experience of the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated the value of a united response to common challenges. As the African Union Chair in 2020, South Africa led the continental response to COVID-19, overseeing a continent-wide strategy, setting up innovative online platforms to provide access for all countries on our continent, including countries such as the Caribbean, and mobilizing international funding and securing over 500 million COVID vaccines for the continent. Now, as chair of the African Union COVID-19 Commission, we continue to lead the continent on health security matters as a means of preventing and responding to the pandemic and plan for future pandemics as well. We are working as co-chair of the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator, together with the World Health Organization and other organizations, to develop a global platform that will enable rapid development of and equitable access to tools needed to respond to any future pandemics at a global level as well. These are part of the concerted efforts to ensure that Africa and the global community are adequately prepared for any future health emergencies. While much of this work does not find its way into the headlines, the reality is that these are efforts that are necessary for the development and transformation of our country. While others make a lot of noise on the sidelines, the reality is that this government is building the future today. As a government, as we move on, honorable members, the values contained in our Constitution are essential in shaping the South Africa that we want. The Constitution of our country calls for a society that is based on human dignity, the achievement of equality, and the advancement of human rights and freedoms. and it calls for the accountability, responsiveness, as well as openness in government. These values provide a sense of purpose and direction for all of us, individuals, families, and communities, and a shared vision of what is important and meaningful to us. To live up to these values, to fulfill this bold vision in our Constitution, we must honor them in our own lives as well. We must treat one another with respect, with integrity, with dignity, with responsibility, but importantly also with compassion. We must build a society in which people can work together for the common good, in which all people are treated with the dignity and the respect they deserve, and in which everyone is given the opportunity to reach, yes, their full potential. It is these values that have set our country apart since the dawn of democracy almost 30 years ago. It is these values, too, which inform our relations with all peoples and nations across the world. We have observed with great sorrow the immense loss of life and suffering caused by the recent earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. We once again extend our deepest condolences to the governments and the people of those two countries in the face of this humanitarian disaster. As I conclude, I wish to extend my appreciation to Deputy President David Dabede Mabuza, who has given me unwavering support over the last 5 years. Not only has he given me support as president, he has been working side by side with me over these past 5 years and has executed the tasks that I have allocated to him, tasks such as heading and leading the South African National AIDS Council, the extensive engagements that he has had with military veterans, the job and the task that he has had in engaging with traditional leaders throughout the country on critical issues such as communal land and also their ability to execute their work as an important structure in the state. He has supported peace-building efforts in South Sudan and led processes around land reform, amongst other things. Deputy President David Mabuza has indicated his wish to step down from his position. This is a request I've informed him I'm considering and attending to, and I would like to thank him for the work that he has done for this nation and for all of us. DP, cheers. I also wish to extend my thanks to ministers and deputy ministers that I'm privileged to work with. I thank them for the outstanding work that they do in the service of the people of our country. I also wish to thank the premiers of our country all 9 premiers, from the Western Cape right through to Limpopo. Even you can applaud on the other side. I have really thoroughly enjoyed working with our premiers. Yes, I am sure. Almost, at the very least, 2 to 3 times a year, we hold our Presidential Coordinating Council meeting, and we exchange views on a number of issues. And I've always found our premiers very creative, very energetic, and full of ideas, such as being able to write letters to me and say, "President, declare a state of disaster." So I thank them. I also I'd like to extend my gratitude to our Directors General. The Directors General and DDGs are the real engine of our government, and I'd like to thank them, together with a number of other officials in our government, and indeed those hordes of people who work in our government system, from the cleaners to the gardeners right up to the top. And I'd like to thank the advisors, my advisors as well, and the staff in the presidency for their hard work. And I'd like to thank my protectors as well. A journalist asked me over the weekend whether I was ever terrified or scared. I said, no, I wasn't. And it was largely due to the fact that I have really good protectors, and I thank them. Finally, let me thank all of you, leaders of various political parties, and all of you as members of Parliament. I thank you all for the inputs you have made, the criticisms that you level at me, and suggestions that you put forward, and all what you express. I really thank you, because this is what makes our democracy a rich democracy. Finally, allow me to reiterate what I said in 2018 State of the Nation address, delivered exactly 5 years ago today. I said we should reaffirm our belief that South Africa belongs to all who live in it. For though we are a diverse people, we are one nation. There are 57 million of us. That's what I said then. There are now closer to 61 million of us, each with different histories, languages, cultures, experiences, views, and interests. And in fact, I digress. When it comes to views, I always think that there are 61 million views. Each one of us have a different view on any issue. But I continued to say, yet we are bound together by a common destiny. We are one people committed to work together to find jobs for our youth, to build factories and roads, houses and clinics, to prepare our children for a world of change and progress, to build cities and towns where families may be safe, productive, and be content. While there are many issues on which we may differ, on these fundamental matters, we are at one. So, honorable members, South Africans are a resilient people. They are a hopeful people. And indeed, there are reasons for hope. But we cannot live on hope alone, as many of you have said. Dit is waar, achtbare Detroit, die Suid-Afrikaanse mense verdien beter as aanvervulde and leer beloofdes. It is the job of government to deliver basic services, to protect its citizens from harm, to create the conditions in which every person can thrive. Mushumo wa muvhuso washu ndwa uri unakise Afrika Tshipembe. U itela uri vhathu vha hashu vha kone u tshila vhutshilo vhune ha ḓo vha takadza. Ndi hezwi zwine ra fanela uri ri ite hafhanoni Afrika Tshipembe uri vhathu vha hashu vha kone u bvelela phanḓa zwavhuḓi. That is why, as we work to implement the actions that will restore our country's promise, I'm not asking for your patience. I'm asking for you to support our people as they work with us to address all these challenges. That's all I am asking for. Let us never forget that whatever our challenges, whatever our differences, noma sihluka kuphi nakuphi noma kuyini, sonke asifani kodwa okusihlanganisayo ukuthi izwe lakithi liphumelele liye phambili. Iloko okusidibanisayo. So in the end, we all seek the same future for our country. It is therefore important, and I repeat, that we should stand together to build that future. Batho ba haeso ba batla go re bona re kopane re le ntho e le nngwe re sebetsa mmoho hi tira swin'we hi pfelela amahlweni hi leswi va swi lavaka. I thank you.
Thank you very much, honorable members. I now take this opportunity to thank the honorable president for his address and to remind members that they should wait until the procession has left the sitting. That, honorable members, concludes the debate of the State of the Nation address and business for the day. The joint sitting is now adjourned.
Viewers, as you can see, the State of the Nation address reply has just been delivered by the state president as he sought to not only reflect on the commitments that were made or the comments that were made from various other political parties, in fact, all 14 political parties that are represented in Parliament. The president obviously took this opportunity to remind all political parties and all members of the political parties that are represented in Parliament of the imperative of unity, that the development landscape in our country really requires unity rather than actually mudslinging and finding fault with one another. But that's where we are. Thembinkosi, your thoughts?
Yes, well, the one thing that I've been taking out from the president's speeches is the message of unity. He doesn't leave out that message of unity. Is just reminded the South Africans what he said when he delivered the State of the Nation address in 2018, that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, and is further asked that we be patient as we allow the government to address the challenges that are currently confronting our country. And
Indeed.
Clearly, government cannot do it alone. We need to stand together as a country in unity, because that is the only way, seemingly, that will overcome the challenges that are currently facing our nation. So
Absolutely.
the President has listened to all the issues that were raised, has taken in all the issues that were raised, he welcomed the issues that were raised by members, and he's promised that he's not going to leave those issues lying. You know.
Indeed, and also as we reflect on some of the commitments that were made by from the legislative sector space, we've had some commitments and comments, obviously, from the chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, as well as the Speaker of the National Assembly, that from an oversight perspective, they will be doing targeted and gunning for outcome-based oversight. So really, this is a critical year not only for the executive to implement, but it's also a testing year for the legislative sector to ensure that it actually puts the appropriate mechanisms and systems in place to be able to put in place systems for outcome-based oversight.
Absolutely, Sibulelo. It's time now for the committees of parliament to get on with their programs. Commitments have been made. President has outlined. Yes, we wait next week for the Minister of Finance to put budget to those commitments, but it's really also time for the committees of parliament to get ready with the programs. We are in the final year of this administration, so it's really time for Parliament to exercise the oversight that is expected from
and that is,
the
of course,
institution.
its constitutional mandate. And one of the key pillars of Parliament's constitutional mandate, and that, of course, is, I mean, that also refers to the broader legislative sector, is to ensure that it conducts oversight. And if we are thinking about the Constitution as an instrument of transformation, and the concept of transformative constitutionalism comes to mind, that really when all the three arms of state, but specifically in this instant, is obviously the role of the executive in implementing, taking policy, or taking the challenges from the development landscape of the country and turning those into actionable and implementable plans. But equally so, the responsibility also rests with Parliament to ensure within that ambit and within that space of transformative constitutionalism that it takes its constitutional mandate and actions it in a manner that is able to advance transformation.
And we had an opportunity to speak to a number of chairpersons during the shows, you know, wherein they also indicated that we have heard what the President have said. It is now upon us as the legislatures to then oversee that such programs that the President has committed on are implemented by government.
Absolutely. And another key point that was raised by the President started off, but of course acknowledging all of the key inputs that were made, that came from the floor, that came from all the 14 parties that are represented in Parliament, and of course including the special delegates as well from the NCOP who came through the NCOP, the premiers who were there, but doing was to contextualize. That it is important for us to remember that there are there's a multiplicity of challenges that we're facing as a country that we probably would have been much further by now had it not been for the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. And we obviously cannot, you know, look at the current context without actually reflecting on the far-reaching impact that the COVID pandemic has had on all aspects of life in South Africa, not only for South Africans, globally as well.
It would definitely be irresponsible for us to overlook that COVID happened in 2020. We're all there. We saw the impact of government. We know that in some instances, it was even beyond what government can offer, because remember, this pandemic just came, and it was not just limited to South Africa or the continent. As you have rightly indicated, it was a global challenge. It was the first time for the world to go through what we had to go through. Definitely, it will not take us a year or two to overcome the challenges that have arisen as a result of the COVID-19. But as the President has always emphasized, if we stand united and work together, definitely we will overcome some of the challenges we are currently confronted with today.
Absolutely. So when we're reflecting on not only the impact of the COVID-19 on the economy, but on all aspects of life, and of course, the issue of load shedding has also exacerbated, you know, conditions in the country, living conditions as well, and also made it very difficult for the economy to grow as well, because obviously infrastructure, all forms of infrastructure, including the provision of sustainable electricity or energy, is also important. But the President has put forth quite a number of key interventions addressing those 4 areas that he has announced, in that he did indicate that these are the most critical and the most burning issues for South Africans right now: load shedding, at the top of the agenda, with that the state of disaster that has been declared to address the issue of load shedding. All systems have been put in place, and coupled with that, very important, is the fact that there is the experience that has come through from the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of the corruption and all of that. It was the first time that we dealt, with a challenge of that nature as a country, but globally as well. But also just indicating that we have learned from the COVID pandemic. We have also learned from what happened when there were the floods in KZN and in parts of the Eastern Cape. So, of course, bringing in the Auditor General so that the Auditor General can be part and parcel of that process to actually monitor expenditure patterns on a day-to-day, in fact, in real time, and to also then empower Parliament with that information and to empower all of the necessary, other institutions for whom that information would be relevant to curb corruption. But importantly, the President just, reaffirming his commitment to South Africans that the issues that are most pressing to ordinary South Africans, these issues are at the top of the agenda for government, and government is here to make sure that the lives of ordinary South Africans are actually improving for the better.
And so one stakeholder that I would really love to see being assisted is the small business community, because they are the ones that are really suffering from this load shedding.
Absolutely.
Part of the, in the President's plan is indicated that we might see people being assisted with generation, with solar panel power. So we really hope to see this part of President's commitment being fast-tracked, because they are the ones, small businesses are suffering. If you live in our communities, you would see the impact of load shedding in their businesses. Imagine a barber shop that sometimes has to close for about 4 hours. And you find that that business, that barber shop, is the source of income to a certain family. So if that barber shop is closed for 4 hours, that means there is no income for that 4 hours. And so really going to be keeping an eye, but in particular on that one. As we had indicated, that like today is the last day, Civil, just to move away from what we're talking about now. Absolutely. So today was the last day. The President has replied. It's been a marathon of debate at Parliament. Absolutely. I can safely say that Parliament TV has done very well in terms of bringing SONA 2023 to our viewers.
Absolutely. And with that said, I think it is important for us to then leave it there and just to reiterate to our viewers at home that 4 critical issues coming out of the State of the Nation address as committed to by the President. That's load shedding, that's reducing the high rates of unemployment. 3, that's poverty and rising cost of living. And 4, of course, crime and corruption. We've seen robust debate between Tuesday and Wednesday. And today the President has given his reply, obviously reiterating his commitment, reaffirming his commitment as the state president to ensure that no stone will be left unturned in ensuring that the commitments that were made are actually being implemented. With that said, viewers, we are going to leave you there for now. But remember, next week, the Minister of Finance will be tabling the budget, and that budget is supposed to be it's actually supposed to allocate resources towards funding the program of action for the year ahead. With that said, I'd like to thank you for staying with us throughout this process since last week, Thursday, and of course up until now, until the President delivering his speech. With that said, thank you to everyone, the crew, the team, and everyone else who has had a hand in making sure that this broadcast is a success. Have a wonderful evening.
On Wednesday, the 22nd of February 2023 at 2 p.m., the Minister of Finance, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, will deliver the Budget Speech 2023 to a sitting of the National Assembly held at the Cape Town City Hall. The budget process is one of the critical instruments that Parliament uses to conduct oversight over the executive. Through budget speech, the Minister will update the nation on the state of the economy, public finances, and progress on the government's objectives in terms of service delivery. The budget comprises of the fiscal framework, the appropriation bill, the division of revenue bill, as well as the related budget information. Watch the budget speech live across Parliament's platforms from 2 p.m. on Wednesday, 22 February 2023. For more information, visit Parliament's website on www.parliament.gov.za. Parliament, following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.
book, our constitution, protects our society and empowers us to govern. The Protea leaves are us, the people, who freely elect our voices in Parliament. The drum calls the people of Parliament, through whom we govern together. And the sun is our country, healing our past, improving our lives, and energizing our potential. Together, our constitution, our people, our parliament, and our country are building our great South African nation. Parliament TV, channel 408 on DSTV.